Hey guys, welcome back to Falcons Central Radio on the Pro Football Central Radio Network. I'm Aaron Freeman, founder of FalcFans.com, and I am joined by my co-host, Mr. Scott Karasik over at Sports Not. We are back this week to talk about our favorite football team, the Atlanta Falcons. We'll talk a little bit about some of the roster moves that they made this past week. They signed a kicker. That's always big news. We'll be talking about what we thought of the Falcons' performance in the second preseason game against the Cleveland Browns, and we'll preview a little bit of what we expect to see this upcoming week against the Miami Dolphins. And of course, we'll answer all you guys' mailbag questions towards the end of the show. So, Scott, let's get these roster moves out of the way like we often do. At least this week's moves seem a little bit more substantial than last week's moves because we signed a kicker in Shane Graham, who played 5 games with the Falcons last year as Matt Bryant's injury replacement. And it suggests that the Falcons maybe, I don't know. What do you sort of see this? Is this a signal that Matt Bryant might be on the bubble, or is this they just needed a competent kicker to get through the rest of the preseason games? Because Nick Rose definitely was not cutting it.
I think Matt Bryant could definitely be on the pup bubble. Maybe not the roster bubble, but he's injured. He's kind of, feeling it. Might have to spend a couple weeks, getting healthy at the beginning of the season. Let's just sign Shane Graham. We know what he can do. We know he's a reliable enough kicker to get you through the first 6 weeks, and then just go from there. And as much as I love Matt Bryant for what he's done for the franchise, sometimes how life works in the NFL. You get injured, someone's going to get signed, someone's going to come in and take your job for at least a little bit. And if he's not healthy after those 6 weeks, I do think they cut him.
Yeah, I don't have much more to add. If this is a signal that the end is near for Matt Bryant, I will be disappointed. It will be the end of an era. It was nice to basically have the last, 7 years of basically every time the Falcons were about to attempt a field goal, that you were pretty confident that it was going to go in, especially when it was in sort of critical situations. I know Football Outsiders had an article last spring basically looking at their data since like the mid-'80s and looking at clutch kicking statistics. And based off of their data, Matt Bryant is the greatest clutch kicker of all time. So, if we lose him, you're probably going to feel that because I know Shane Graham wasn't very highly rated on that list of players. So it is one of those things where if the Falcons have to go through a season with Shane Graham, he showed last year that he was competent, so I think they'll be fine. But it is going to be an area of concern entering next offseason because Shane Graham is 41, 38, or whatever, how old he is. And, he's no Matt Bryant. That's what I'll say. So I doubt we're going to see him play until he's 40, like we've seen with Matt Bryant over the years. So, I hope they're just signing Shane Graham because they're tired of Nick Rose sucking in the preseason. And, maybe Matt Bryant issues, the muscle tightness or whatever it is that he's dealing with, might keep him out for a couple more weeks. But hopefully it's not going to be a significant loss. And, maybe we only see one regular season game of Shane Graham and then we can go back to Matt Bryant. So we'll see what happens. Some of the other moves is pretty low key. As I mentioned before, they cut Nick Rose. They cut Jake Reed with an injury settlement. He was the third string center. They signed Sergio Brown, who is a special teams extraordinaire. I was a little ecstatic with that move because I remember Sergio playing for the Colts and he was an outstanding special teams player. They put Chris Mays, the nose tackle, on injured reserve. Any of those moves stand out? Sergio Brown move for you, Scott?
I mean, Sergio Brown looks like competition behind Keanu Neal for that third strong safety role with Damian Barnes if they decide to do it. If they decide to go with 5 safeties, I think Brown would be right in there with Niesman and Barnes for the spot. other than that, I don't really think he offers much outside of like a fifth safety and special teams guy. So basically, what Charles Godfrey was last year.
Yeah, that's a fair statement.
Yeah, I mean that's about it. And then Chris May is going on IR as opposed to just being outright cut. I think that's a good move. Big guy, moved well. Injury was unfortunate, but I do like the idea of bringing him back next year in camp, letting him have a shot at the roster. Because he was an impact guy at Georgia, but his impact wasn't anything more than like, hey, I'm holding up the A gap right now, no one can get around me.
Mm-hmm.
But in this scheme, if you have a guy who can do that, it helps the Grady Jarretts, the Jonathan Dabinos, those guys in the world have a nice shot at winning a job. Or not winning a job, but winning on that play.
Yeah, I thought he played pretty well against the Redskins. Unfortunately, we didn't get an opportunity to see more of him. He didn't play a ton against the Redskins, got it in the fourth quarter, but I thought he did his job, which is basically what you say for his nose tackle, and that's what you look for. It was Joey Mbu esque in terms of what Mbu did last summer. So we'll see if sort of he can sort of come back from the injury next year and sort of put it together. Traditionally, these sort of low-level IR players that the Falcons sort of waive injured at this point in the year, at least judging from last year's roster moves, typically don't tend to last long because I know all the guys that they waived injured last summer wound up getting cut at some point before training camp this year, either during the season or after the season. So hopefully he won't fall into that same fate, and hopefully he gets another opportunity to play in the NFL, because it would be unfortunate if his NFL dreams are over now because of one untimely injury. Okay, let's talk about this Browns game where the Falcons pulled off another win. It's the first time the Falcons have started the preseason 2-0 since 2005. I know that's the most important stat in the world for most people because preseason wins matter. But no, kidding. I guess the big takeaway from this game for me was how dominant the Falcons looked on the ground. They rushed for 224 yards. Pretty much every running back that played, with possible exception of Tevin Coleman, really looked really sharp in this game. I don't know if this is a sign of the Falcons' running game is poised to be sort of that league-leading sort of unit that I think they need to be this year, or it's also a sign that maybe the Browns, who were like the 30th best run defense in the league last year, really haven't improved all that much. It's probably a combination of both, but sort of where it falls in that, I guess, we'll find out as the regular season happens. But it was certainly a positive sign that, maybe the Falcons running game is at least looking like it has the potential to be a true difference maker this year. So.
It was a pretty solid running game last year, though. And it wasn't absolutely ridiculously amazing, but it was still, the 14th or 15th best unit last year in terms of yards per carry, because that's what I look at. And I think this year they're probably going to be, 9 or 10. It's not going to be the absolute best group out there in terms of running the ball, just because the guards aren't that good right now, and that's a big spot in where you do get your rushing offense from. But even still, it's tough to get really mad at that, at how they performed against the Browns, because they did their job. The offensive line looked great. First team and second team looked great run blocking.
Yeah, no, last year's running game I think is a little overrated. I think they were 25th in the league in yards per carry. And outside of those 6 really monster games Devontae Freeman had last year, they were the worst running team in the NFL in the other 10 games that they played last year in terms of yards, total yards, rushing yards. And I feel like, 6 games last year, we had a great running game. The other 10 games, we had a pretty terrible running game. And, where that balances out is up to each individual. But to me, that's a league average running game. And I think one of the issues that they had last year is because Kyle Shanahan's offense is so sort of dictated by the play action offense. You really need to get the running game going to sort of really set up this offense to be in the best position. And being league average of what they were last year just wasn't good enough, particularly in the latter half of the season where they really struggled to run the football. They didn't have a single 100-yard game after week 12 last year, rushing. So, I think that contributed to some of the offensive struggles, and I don't think this offense is capable of sort of achieving at the highest level that they're capable of if they don't get the running game going. And I think it was a positive sign to see them sort of dominate a bad Browns run defense in this preseason game. Now, whether that means that they're going to dominate teams in the regular season, again, we'll have to wait and see. But it was definitely a positive sign. I like that Devontae Freeman looked like he was in regular season form. He looks so good that I don't even know if we need to really see him outside maybe a series against the Dolphins. Just no point in risking injury with him. I thought the backups looked good. I thought Cyrus Gray looked great. I thought Brandon Wiles looked good. I thought Gus Johnson had a nice game. I mean, the only running back that I thought was just okay was Tevin Coleman. Now, granted, I think he only had maybe like 2 or 3 carries, so it's not a big sample size to judge from. But there were a little bit of issues with his vision. I believe Matt Waldman from the RSP Rookie Scouting Portfolio posted a video on his website that sort of outlined the difference between Devontae Freeman and Tevin Coleman in a couple of runs, and sort of where Freeman is sort of, showing the things that make Devontae Freeman so good, and Coleman was a little bit iffy. And those were some things that I noticed when I rewatched the game. And I don't know, it's just, like, again, it's a preseason game. We'll always preface everything by saying it's a preseason game, so take it with a certain amount of salt.
It's a preseason game, but these are the same issues Tevin showed last year. And it all boils down to a lack of patience. All boils down to a lack of patience. He barely sees a hole open up. He attacks it. Devontae sees a small hole open up. He's like, all right, hold on. That's not the right hole.
Yeah.
That's not what I saw in film.
Devontae is anticipating daylight. And Coleman is basically, if he sees it, he'll attack it. But if he doesn't see it, he's not attacking it. And, like, that's fine. If our offensive line is going to dominate teams and create a whole bunch of holes for him, then that's not going to be an issue. But it is one of those things that, some of these teams that we're going to face this year are some of the top run defenses in the league last year, at least. And if you assume that there's not going to be a whole lot of drop off from teams like Carolina and Seattle and St. Louis and et cetera, then, that's going to be a little bit problematic for our offensive line. You want to have a player like Devontae who can get yards that aren't necessarily blocked for him. And I don't know if Tevin Coleman's shown that yet, but, he has a whole season for us to really discover that. And I won't say with finality based off of, a handful of runs in the preseason whether or not he's done that, but it just, you didn't see it against the Browns, and hopefully we'll see it in the upcoming weeks. So, Scott, who else did you think really stood out to you in that game?
I thought Brandon Wiles looked amazing. I thought he looked like the second best running back on the roster.
Okay.
He found the hole. He has great vision. He's got better vision than Cyrus Gray. I know you're going to keep saying Cyrus Gray is that second best running back on the roster, but Wiles legitimately looked like the second best running back on the roster with his vision. He only had 8 carries, but he managed to score a 32-yard touchdown. The only play that really stood out to me that I didn't like was a sweep that he did on one play, and he only gained like 2 yards on it because he just went out too wide. And then later he ran that exact same play for 32 yards. He had a couple of other short gains, but they were successful plays for what they were. There were plays where he was either supposed to be stopped in the backfield, or I don't know. There's just something about a guy who can always get positive yardage that makes him worth watching. He was running the same plays that Tevin Coleman was running and being successful, and Coleman was running those same plays and not being successful. And it just has me questioning what anybody on the roster, what anybody in coaching or on the anybody like on the roster, anybody in coaching is really seeing with Tevin Coleman right now. I just don't get it. I thought he was a good running back in college. I don't think he's a good fit in Atlanta right now. And I would love to see him traded for somebody just because I don't think he's the right guy.
Interesting. I am not ready to go that far. I was a little disappointed with his performance, but I certainly don't think the Falcons should be in a mindset of giving up on Tevin Coleman right now. I thought Brandon Wilds played well. I thought he played well against the Redskins. I think he played well against the Browns. I'm not quite as huge a Brandon Wilds sort of stan as other people are, as you yourself are, Scott. I think he's played well, so I'm not going to take anything away from him. You know, all the things that you said about Brandon Wilds, I thought Cyrus Gray did that. You know, one of the things I noticed with Cyrus Gray was he was freelancing a little bit, but and by that I mean he was sort of abandoning some of the run plays that were the design of the run plays early. But I sort of understand that because he was really doing a good job getting yards that weren't blocked for him. And I really thought, you know, we have a very different opinion on this sort of thing, but I thought Cyrus Gray was getting yards that weren't blocked for him. And I think the thing that Wilds has done consistently this preseason has really sort of gotten the yards that were blocked for him as opposed to the other thing. You know, I think
Wilds is following the flow of the play, the way it's designed, which is not a bad thing if you're a coach and you're looking at the scheme and you're looking at it actually get results. And he believes in the scheme and he's following the play and it runs and it works for him. Gray doesn't follow the flow of the play and it does lead to negative plays for him. For me, I guess just seeing a negative run when a guy picks the wrong hole is not a good thing. And I feel like we saw that a couple of times with Cyrus Gray and we didn't see that with Wilds.
That's fair. I mean, I think, you know, there's times where that sort of freelancing behavior got him in trouble, but I think for the most part, it worked out for him better than it did not. And so to me, I think the battle for the running back position is going to be an interesting one because I do feel like I don't think that we can declare anybody a winner right now. I don't necessarily know if Teron Ward is lost. I don't think Gray has taken the job. I don't think Wilds has won the job outright. I don't think we can count out Gus Johnson at this point. I think it's really going to boil down to what these guys do this week against Miami and next week against Jacksonville before we can really say definitively who's going to be the third running back on the depth chart this year. And I still feel like it's not going to matter a whole lot what they do as running backs. I think it's really going to depend on who does this team trust can pass protect and who does this team think can play on special teams. And I don't necessarily know if Brandon Wilds has really stood out in either of those two areas to sort of give him this sort of firm lead that I think a lot of people think he has. We'll see. You know, there's always a couple of curveballs that the Falcons throw with the roster, so it wouldn't shock me at all if Brandon Wilds winds up getting that job. But I don't necessarily know if right now he's got the lead that I think people think he does, just based purely off of his rushing ability.
I will say I don't think Teron Ward makes the final roster, at least as an active player.
Okay.
You can't be inactive 3 preseason games. You can't go 3 with an injury in the preseason and expect to be on the active roster come opening day. I think if he does make the roster, it's on the PUP list. They're going to let him have a shot. And then if he earns it in practice, then they'll give it to him. But I don't see him earning a spot on the active roster, at least not this season. And what's nice about that is he could always go to the practice squad. He's still got eligibility.
Yeah, I mean, look, if I was betting money, I probably wouldn't put money on Terrence Ward making the team right now, today. But I do feel like, he didn't really do anything last preseason in the games, but they still liked him. So, I think there's something they like about him that as long as he shows up against Jackson, he plays against Jacksonville and looks decent, I think he'll still have a better than average shot than I think, probably people would assume just because of his absence. So, again, if he has 4 carries for 6 yards against Jacksonville, then yeah, he's probably screwed up his chance. But, for all we know, that last preseason game, he could go for 40 or 50 yards or whatever, and that's a different conversation. Some other guys that I thought stood out, I thought Devin Fuller had a good game. I thought Devondre Campbell actually played better against the Browns than he did against the Redskins. I thought his coverage abilities really stood out. I know he gave up that one completion, but I thought he had great position on that play and sort of, sometimes you get beat. That's what happens in the NFL. I know it's crazy for some people to think that, but sometimes you get beat.
That was a great pass and a great catch there. I mean, the placement on that pass you couldn't beat.
Yeah. I thought Adrian Claiborne played well. Actually played pretty well against the run, which was not been his sort of MO throughout his career. Had a couple of nice tackles for loss and whatnot. And Mohamed Sanu even played pretty decently. So good for those guys.
Yeah, I mean, I like Sanu. I think if they use him the way that they used him against the Browns this season, that kind of gives you the plan, if you will, Aaron, for, hey, let's give Sanu everything underneath on 2nd and 3rd down and short. Hey, it's 2nd and 5. Let's run a 5-yard slant to Sanu. Hey, it's 3rd and 3. Let's run this curl to Sanu as the first option. That way you don't have Julio running that 3-yard curl or that 5-yard slant. And Sanu does pretty well with those kind of routes. That's where he wins.
Okay. I mean, yeah, I think Sanu, I think his best ability is what he showed against the Browns. Is his ability to get yards after catch. I think if you sort of design some plays for him, he can do some damage. I still question his ability to go out there and sort of win one-on-ones. We'll have to see how that goes. I'm not gonna say anything. I think Sanu's played well this preseason, so I'm not gonna be too judgmental about that. But I do feel like I need to see him against some real NFL corners, and in the 3rd and 4th quarter of games in some critical situations before I'm prepared to suggest that he's as this huge, massive addition to our offense. But I think he's done a decent job this preseason, maybe even a pretty good job. So if that passes for a compliment for Mohamed Sanu, then I just gave one and I filled my quota for the year. So
it's going to be so amazing when he randomly scores that 8-yard touchdown on a 3-yard slant in the red zone this year in the 4th quarter against the Saints game. Like in a Saints game, you're going to be like, God damn it, I have to like Mohamed Sanu now.
Well, yeah.
He just won a game. He just added one win to the Falcons that they would not have otherwise had. And you're going to be like, God damn it, why do I like Sanu now?
I look forward to that day. It takes a lot of energy to hate on Mohamed Sanu. So I would look forward to the day where I don't have to hate on him anymore.
I look forward to the day when you're only hating on players like Levine Toilolo and, Paul Warlow and like the guys who aren't even really playing. And you're like, Paul Warlow sucks. And we're like, dude, he's the backup. That's why. Yeah, he sucks. That's why he's the backup. Like, shut up, Aaron. Quit being such a hater. He's the backup middle linebacker.
That's what I do.
Like that's who you're gonna hate on.
I do like to hate on random players. Yeah, no one is Nate Stupar. So yeah, that's pretty much that comes with the territory. So
He's not Nate Stupar. He's not going to be the best special teams linebacker we have. And we're going to be like, dude, just shut up.
Yeah,
like
I get that a lot.
Yeah.
Speaking of hating on players, there was a couple of guys that I didn't think played particularly well in that game. You mentioned one of them, Toy Lolo. I thought his blocking was pretty rough. Paul Kruger seemed to own him pretty much every time they lined up against one another. I think Toy Lolo, everybody knows that Toy Lolo's job on this team is to block, because for some reason we refuse to use him in the red zone. So primarily, his job is to block, and I think Tila Vea has significantly outplayed him and all the other Falcon tight ends in terms of blocking. And I feel like if you assume that the status quo is maintained and Toy Lolo doesn't step up his blocking significantly, or Tila Vea doesn't struggle in one of these games coming up as a blocker, and I have no reason to think he will, I think Tila Vea is going to wind up winning that third tight end spot and be a regular option for the Falcons in terms of their two tight end blocking sets.
I think it's possible that we see Josh Perkins earn that job as the third tight end, and they just go with Hooper out there on all the two tight end sets. Because Hooper actually looked solid as a blocker. He didn't look amazing, but he looked better than Toy Lolo's looked. And he looked better than Tammy's looked. So why not throw him out there? Yeah, he's a rookie. Yeah, he's a third-round pick. He's kind of a project. But at the same time, get him out there. Get him game time experience. What's the worst that can happen? He misses a block, and the Falcons lose 2 yards on the third down. I mean, shit like that's going to happen anyway if you throw out Toy Lolo. So why not throw Hooper out there and at least let him have the experience?
No, I think we're going to see quite a bit of Hooper, particularly early in the season. Probably used a little bit more than probably people would want to see as a blocker. So I think that's all fair. I think the issue with Perkins, and I could see Perkins making the team, but probably only if the Falcons keep 4 tight ends. Just because I think when you're a backup tight end and you're the Falcons and you run 2 tight end sets about 15 to 20% of the time, those sets come primarily when you're either trying to run the football or you're using play action passing. And so you're not throwing to the tight end. So really your only value as the number 2 tight end and number 3 tight end in this offense is really your ability to block, or at least look like you're about to block. So I feel like Perkins, if you're the number 3 tight end and, in the scenario where Tammy gets hurt and all of a sudden the number 2 guy, which is probably going to be Hooper, and the number 3 guy are now the 2 tight ends, you want someone who's going to be a competent blocker. And I think that's why Tila Vea or Toy Lolo are still in a better position than Josh Perkins to make the team. Now, that being said, I still think Perkins has a decent shot because of his ability as a pass catcher and because he's played well enough that I think the Falcons could have some serious concerns about his ability to clear waivers. Because as people may or may not know that are listening to this, if you cut a guy that's played less than 4 years in the NFL, they have to pass through waivers, which gives an opportunity for all 31 other teams to claim him and sign him. And I think, that has to happen in order for you to put guy in a practice squad. So I feel like there's a decent chance that if Perkins continues to make an impact in the passing game, the Falcons are not going to be able to stash him on the practice squad for a year. And so they'll keep him as the 4th tight end, probably be inactive every game, but he'll be a guy that they can sort of develop and hopefully improve his blocking to the point that maybe later in the season they can throw him out there on the field and he won't be sort of a liability. So I think that's really Perkins' path to making the roster. I don't see him making it as one of the 3 guys that we keep, but I do feel like he still has a decent chance to wind up sticking. Okay, Scott, you want to get into this Dolphins game? I don't know if there's a whole lot more that we need to add about the Browns game.
No, I mean, there were some disappointing showings. Neal missed the coverage. Trufant missed the coverage. Deion Jones just seemed out of it with his run fits. But these are all things that he's going to learn.
Yeah, I agree with you.
So, I mean, it's not a perfect game, but it was a game that we needed to see. And Terrell Pryor looks like he's going to be a damn good receiver with RG3 throwing him the ball. And I kind of want to say go for it with him in the fantasy league, but I don't want to have people take my guy. So
okay, well now you
there's my last round pick.
No one's going to take him now because you just said that.
Don't take him, please.
So, moving to this week's game, the Falcons are going to be playing the Dolphins on Thursday night on NBC on National Football. That game's going to be taking place in Orlando, the Camp World Stadium or whatever it's called. This is the dress rehearsal game. This is the
Citrus Bowl. It's the Citrus Bowl.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, that's what it is. You're right. I'm sorry.
Camperworld.com, like, who gives a damn about these stupid names? It's the Citrus Bowl.
Fair enough.
Just like Sun Life Stadium down in Miami is Joe Robbie Stadium. It's the exact same stadium that they've been playing at since the 60s.
It's fair enough, man. You're right. It is the Citrus Bowl. The thing about this game is going to be interesting because, as I said, it's the dress rehearsal game. We should see the starters play the first half and maybe even a series on the second half. Last year, that was not the case when we played the Dolphins in the third game, just because Matt Ryan was getting destroyed because our offensive line was getting destroyed. And so they pulled Matt Ryan midway through the second quarter, like, okay, we're not going to risk this dude getting injured just because our offensive line sucks. Thereafter, we made all the moves that we made to sort of shape up the offensive line. Hopefully, this game sort of goes without a hitch in terms of they blow up some roster spot. It's going to be interesting. Vic Beasley's supposed to come back this week. He's dealt with the shoulder sprain, missed last week's game. There is a little bit of a concern whether or not he's 100%, but if he's going to play, then we would assume that he's very close to it. So if he wasn't, then they wouldn't play him. And Ward is going to miss this week's game again with another ankle injury. As we mentioned earlier, Matt Bryant's going to miss this game with muscle tightness. Kamal Ishmael missed last week's game with a shoulder injury. He's going to be out this week. Some notable injuries on the Dolphins front. Cameron Wake is going to be a game-time decision. He's still recovering from his Achilles tear. He ended his season last year. Mike Pouncey, the center, is out with a hip injury. He's going to miss, I think, a couple of weeks in the regular season. So hopefully our defensive line can sort of prey on Anthony Steen or whoever it is that's replacing him. And their rookie cornerback, Xavier Howard, is out with a knee injury. So maybe those will present some favorable matchups for some Falcon players to sort of feast on some backup players. That's it as far as the injury updates go. But, some of the key matchups I'm looking forward to in this game, Scott, probably the big one, or there's two big ones in my opinion. The one is if Wes Schweitzer gets starting reps, and it sounds like he's going to continue to get work on the right guard, that means he's going to be faced up with Ndamukong Suh quite a bit in this game. And that's going to be a very big test for him to sort of see how NFL ready he is. And the other big matchup I'm really looking forward to is Brian Poole against Jarvis Landry. Poole has been getting all the first-team reps at nickel cornerback with the Falcons these first two preseason games. I have every reason to believe that will continue into this third preseason game, but he hasn't really been tested by anybody in the first 2 weeks, and that will definitely not be the case going against Jarvis Landry, who is the Dolphins' #1 receiver, and they do feature him in their offense. So he will definitely get tested, and if he holds up against that test, and I think we're going to see Brian Poole open the season as the Falcons' nickel cornerback. If he doesn't, then we'll have to have conversations about what we do at that position. So big week for those.
Interesting. That'll definitely be interesting. I think Landry's going to destroy Poole. I'm just being honest here. I think he's going to destroy Poole. I think they're going to have to put Alford in the slot after a certain point and start putting King on the outside. And just saying, you know what? The Brian Poole experiment's over. This is what we're going to do. Now, Suh versus Schweitzer. Suh will win some matchups against Wes Schweitzer. That's not even a question. As long as Schweitzer can minimize the amount of times that happens, that's what matters. But the Falcons have been wanting to get bigger on the interior of the line, and by getting a 310-pound center and Schweitzer's 315, if those end up being the starting guys, oh, and Levitre's up to like 310. If those end up being the three starting guys on the inside, it'll be because Schweitzer had a great game this week. And because Schweitzer at least held his own against Sue. And I'm not expecting him to do it. I don't think he will do it. But if he happens to do it and Sue gets stonewalled out there and doesn't even get a quarterback hit, barely gets any pressure, like if he just – it all comes down to the passing game more than the running game. If Matt Ryan doesn't get hit by Sue or whoever Schweitzer's lined up against, that's going to be huge for his shot at winning that job. Because Chris Chester cannot hold off Sue. Chris Chester would get destroyed by Sue. I think Schweitzer's going to get destroyed by Sue too. But I don't think either one of these guys can really handle him.
Yeah.
But if for whatever reason, whoever shows out best against him is going to get that job.
Yeah, I think you're pretty right on this one, Scott. Ndamukong Suh is Ndamukong Suh. So, his power is going to be very problematic for both of those guys.
Second best interior defensive lineman in the league.
Yeah, and you can make an argument he's probably the most powerful player in the NFL.
Yeah, that I'd agree with.
So, I think you're right with Chester. Chester always has historically struggled against quality interior players. Like, he's mostly fine, but when he faces the Gerald McCoys and the Jonathan Hankinses and the Ndamukong Suhs of the world, that's when he gets exposed. I'm like you. I'm not very optimistic that Schweitzer is going to necessarily hold his own against Suh. I think Schweitzer has the concerns I've had with Schweitzer has been sort of his technique and his balance and pass protection. And I think that is going to get him into trouble. That's a situation that Suh could easily exploit. I personally think through these first 2 weeks that Chris Chester has significantly outplayed Schweitzer. So I don't necessarily understand why the Falcons are continuing with this charade, as it were, of these two guys fighting over the starting spot. But, maybe it's because they want to get Schweitzer as many reps as possible because he's going to replace Mike Person as the sixth offensive lineman or something like that, maybe. And maybe if he has a good game against Suh, we'll be singing a very different tune with Schweitzer. As far as Jarvis Landry goes, I'm with you. I think we'll probably see Poole get beat. I hope he holds his own against Jarvis Landry. I'm not super optimistic because watching Poole play at Florida, he played with two really good cornerbacks at Florida in Jalen Tabor and Vernon Hargreaves, and he was consistently the guy that opposing teams were able to pick on in coverage. And I feel like with Trufant and Alford locking up Kenny Stills and Devontae Parker this week, hopefully, you're probably going to see quite a bit of balls going Jarvis Landry's way. So, hopefully as long as Poole can sort of hold his own and not look completely overmatched, then I think it'll be a passing grade for him. I think this is two big games for these two rookies. I think if Schweitzer, you're right, Scott, if Schweitzer does handle facing Ndamukong Suh pretty well, then he might wind up winning that job. If Poole winds up handling Jarvis Landry pretty well, then he should win that job because, you're not going to really face a better slot receiver, in the preseason. So that's as good a test as he's going to get. And, the other thing I'm looking forward to seeing is to see if our defensive line and our pass rush, particularly if Beasley's coming back this week, can they do something against this Dolphins offensive line? The Dolphins have revamped their offensive line. As people know, they drafted Laremy Tunsil. He's playing left guard for them. Pouncey's out. They put in Anthony Steen, who used to, I think, play at Alabama at center. Jermon Bushrod, our old friend, is now playing the right guard, and Brandon Albert and Jawan James are pretty good tackles. And from everything I've read, I didn't really watch the game, but everything I read, there was positive comments about the offensive line's play, that five-man unit last week against the Cowboys. And hopefully we'll get to see our pass rush sort of, throw a wrench into that. And we see our guys sort of feast on some of these guys, particularly Beasley, Freeney, Claiborne, etc. I'm also looking forward to seeing maybe if we see Derek Shelby have a breakout game. We've seen Aldrick Robinson and Alex Mack against their old teams play really well. And, Shelby has not played particularly well this preseason, and it's been a little disappointing. And I'm hoping maybe going against his old squad in Miami this week, we'll see his breakout performance and sort of get us back on his side in terms of expectations. So,
I guess I really like Derek Shelby. I just have never been a huge fan of his fit tackle full-time, and I feel like that's how he's been used all preseason. I'd like to see what he's used at, like what he does as the base defensive end on the strong side. I'd like to see that fit for him. I'd like to see Hageman back at 3 technique in the base as well. I just don't think it's a good fit long-term. I haven't been impressed with Hageman at 5 tech this preseason. I thought he played better at 3 tech last year.
Okay. I think Hageman's been fine. I think he's had the best summer of his career, but to each their own. Okay, yeah. So you got anything else to add about the Dolphins game this week, Scott, or you want to move on?
Yeah, I mean, there's really nothing else to talk about with the Dolphins. It's a preseason game. I really just want to see how they handle that full dress rehearsal. But other than that, it's really nothing huge to worry about.
Yeah, I just hope we're not panicking. Like there's been too many summers where the Falcons play the third preseason game and we're panicking about something. And I just hope that we go this summer without having to panic about, this starting unit looked really bad in the third preseason game, and we have to go out and trade for a guy or sign a guy or cut this guy. There always seems to be a little bit of panic this time of year, and hopefully, it's a good sign if there is none. So
hopefully the only panic that we see is for like a nickel corner, because then we're all going to be like, well, yeah, you've got a 7th round second-year player and you got an undrafted rookie going against Jarvis Landry. Yeah, we probably do need to get a slot corner.
Yeah.
But something like that would be fair. It'd be like, okay, yeah, let's go get this slot corner for these next 4 weeks.
Yeah, and that was a position I think we all kind of were looking at and saying, like, it's only a matter of time before they sign somebody. So, that wouldn't be panic-inducing. Now, if Devontae Parker destroys Desmond Trufant or something like that and puts up 200 yards on him in the first half of the game, then that would be a panic-inducing sort of situation. But I don't think we're going to see that happen. So hopefully it's a very quiet week of hot takes starting on Friday. So now, Scott, before we get to the mailbag, I know you wanted to talk a little bit about who do you thought – we talked a little bit about this after our show last week off air. But I know you wanted to talk a little bit about who we thought were going to be the breakout players for the Falcons this week. So I'll let you have the floor and start us off.
So this question was posed to me by one of my editors at Sportsnot. He was running an article on who the Falcons breakout player is going to be. And my first name that popped in my head was Vic Beasley. But he says it can't be anybody in the first round. It can't be like an obvious person. Because someone like Vic Beasley, you were expecting to have somewhat of an issue his first year and then eventually get better after that. Now, that's a fair assessment of Vic Beasley. So I was like, all right, you know what? It's going to be Grady Jarrett. He's going to get more snaps. He's going to look like the starting NFL, one technique penetrator that he is. He's going to be the guy that teams are going, God damn it, this guy is in our backfield. How do we stop it? And I think he'll end up getting anywhere from 4 to 6 sacks this year. And he's going to set off alarms. And people will go, man, we all missed on Grady Jarrett. Like when people were comparing him to Geno Atkins pre-draft, it's not just it wasn't just a size thing. It was definitely a play style comparison. And I think that he could definitely pop out this year and people look at him like, man, the Falcons pass rush came because Grady Jarrett had a breakout year, because Vic Beasley 10 sacks, because I was there and got 7 sacks. You know, the Falcons pass rush unit got 25 sacks this year and did a pretty solid job. And I think that would be a big step if Grady Jarrett does take the next step, and if Vic Beasley does take the next step into being those pass rushers. I think that would be the huge thing for Atlanta making the playoffs. That would be what would propel Atlanta into a playoff run more than anything else.
I don't disagree with that. I do feel like in order for this team to make a playoff run, they have to be able to get effective pressure on the quarterback this year. And we've been saying that for years and years and years, and we've been waiting around for that to happen. And I'm with you on that. Like the first player that came to mind when you asked me who I think is going to be a breakout player, I would say Vic Beasley. In terms of talent-wise, he's the guy that you expect to sort of make that big leap this year. And I think if you're looking at this list, you're really looking at last year's draft picks and saying, okay, which guy is going to go from an inconsistent rookie to an every week down in and down out difference maker. And I think from a talent standpoint, Vic Beasley is probably the best bet. I do agree with you. I think Grady Jarrett would be the option B, so to speak, in terms of a guy that was quietly really good last year on a snap-to-snap basis, despite only playing maybe like 10 or 15 snaps a game, but really shined in those limited opportunities, and with an expanded role has the potential to sort of be a difference maker. I do question a little bit and have this entire offseason whether or not he should be playing nose tackle instead of playing that 3 technique that we have Tyson Jackson playing, or playing beside Jonathan Babineau on nickel downs. And, you know, I do wonder if by the end of the year, particularly if Derek Shelby doesn't really sort of take off as an interior pass rusher, if by the end of this season we're seeing a lot more Grady Jarrett on nickel downs. But just to pick someone different than what you just picked, Scott, I'm going to go with Ricardo Allen. Now, I know people that are longtime listeners of this show know that I've consistently been slightly skeptical of whether Ricardo Allen is a long-term solution to this team.
I'm going to have your back on this one real quick, though. Aaron has been skeptical, but he's been reasonably skeptical because he's like, Ricardo Allen's good, but he's not Earl Thomas. Ricardo Allen's like an average NFL safety. Everybody cool your jets. That's what you've been saying. You haven't been like, no, screw Ricardo Allen the way that you are with Sanu.
Yes.
So I'm going to have your back on this one.
Yeah. I appreciate this guy. Yeah, I mean, I like Ricardo Allen. I think he's a good player. I've been impressed with him. Like, he does a lot of the little things that you need to do to be successful at this level. Like, I think instinctually, you can make a case that he's probably the most instinctual player that we have in our entire defense, with maybe Desmond Trufant and maybe Jonathan Babineau being the 2 guys that you would pick ahead of him, or maybe Dwight Freeney, just based off of Dwight Freeney being Dwight Freeney. But, like, you know, just understanding exactly what he's supposed to do and where he's supposed to be on the field. Like, I think Ricardo Allen does that. And that's what you need when you're a player like Ricardo Allen, who isn't the biggest guy, isn't the strongest guy, isn't the fastest guy. You need to be operating at a level, you need to be 2 steps ahead of what everybody else is doing. And I feel like if that sort of grows together and he sort of shows the growth that he's capable of showing this year, and, you know, again, you know, even though technically he was a rookie in 2014, last year was really his rookie season because he spent most of his rookie season on the practice squad as a nickel cornerback. And last year he was playing safety for the first time really ever in his NFL career. And considering that he came in and was a league average starting safety that was a 5'9", 180-pound cornerback all his entire life, is a very, very positive sign. So if he basically shows that growth, I think we could be looking at Ricardo Allen as somebody who, you know, may not be considered one of the elite safeties in the NFL, but he could have the production that may get him some Pro Bowl votes. And if he gets 4 or 5 picks this year, get some tipped passes, and sort of be the opportunistic player and difference maker that he's shown flashes of being from time to time, and does that more consistently, then I think he could be a real breakout candidate this year. All right. So
yeah,
Scott,
I'm agreeing with you on Ricardo Allen too. He's a good player. He just needs he's not Earl Thomas though. And if he does break out, it's because he's looking like Earl Thomas.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's as you just said, I don't expect him to be Earl Thomas, but if he can be like, and I know I'm going to say this name and people are going to roll their eyes, but like what Jarvis Byrd was when he was in Buffalo, which is why Jarvis Byrd got all that money from the Saints, because he was really good in Buffalo. And I know it's sort of hard for people to believe that now because he's been so bad in New Orleans. But if he could be, in the conversation for that next tier of safeties, which Jarvis Byrd was for a couple of years in Buffalo, then I think Ricardo Allen's capable of doing that. He's just got to go out there and do it. So,
but all Jarvis Byrd did in Buffalo is what Ricardo Allen's job is here. That deep third.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that Jarvis Byrd really did well in Buffalo was he had a knack for making big plays. Like he always seemed to be constantly around the ball, getting strips, breaking up passes, getting picks. Like I'm gonna look up his numbers real quick, but it is one of those things where, like, if you look at his numbers and sort of how opportunistic he was when
he had 9 picks as a rookie. He averaged 4 picks every year after that. He was always forcing fumbles. He was always jumping on the ball. He'd get sacks every now and again. Like he was always knocking the ball away. He had something like an average of 8 pass deflections every year, which for a safety is good.
Yeah.
And I mean, he was just a good, solid all-around safety. So I do agree with you.
Yeah. Yeah. So, here's his numbers. So 5 years as a starter in Buffalo, 22 picks, 2 pick sixes, 33 pass deflections, 11 forced fumbles, 5 fumble recoveries. So, that's pretty good when you're getting a fumble recovery, a pick six every now and then. You're forcing 2 or 3 fumbles a year, breaking up, as Scott just said, 8 passes or whatever. So, hopefully that's sort of what we can expect from Ricardo Allen moving forward. And I think he's capable of doing it. He just got to go out and do it. All right, Scott, let's jump into the mailbag.
So, quick thing.
Okay.
Happy Madden release day to those who love the game. It came out today. If you haven't gotten it, go get it. Our boy Chuck says that it's the absolute best year that they've ever had Madden, so we'll go with that.
Okay.
And let's get into the mailbag.
All right. Okay, the first question comes from Vienna Falcons. He asked this last week after last week's show. He asked, with DQ singling out Ben Garland, Josh Perkins, and Brian Poole recently, what are the chances of them making the roster?
I would put Perkins at about 40%, depending on if they carry a 4th tight end or if they choose Perkins over Toilolo. I think Poole's probably 100%. I think he makes the roster guaranteed. You don't go out there with the first team 3 straight games. Like, it just, you kind of have to. Almost have to keep him on the roster. And then Ben Garland, I would put, if he's not at 100%, he's at like 95%. I think he's been the second best center on this roster this offseason. I think he's been better than Person, and I think he does a good job in the middle.
Yeah, I think Poole, you're right about Poole. It's hard to imagine him getting all these first-team reps and then getting cut, even if he does struggle against Jarvis Landry this year. Now, it may wind up meaning he's the 5th cornerback if he does struggle this week against Landry, but it would be hard to see him suddenly get cut when the Falcons were so confident in his ability to be a starter for 2-3 weeks. I think Garland has leapfrogged Bryce Harris as the 9th offensive lineman. So I feel like at this point, Garland is the guy to beat for that last offensive line spot because I think the Falcons are going to keep 9, and Bryce Harris has been pretty bad, particularly in pass protection this summer. And I think Ben Garland, while he has his issues, I think he's been consistently sort of good and shows some developmental upside. And, Harris is what he is. He's been in the league for 5 years. And if he's not good at this point, then he's not good. As I mentioned before, I think Josh Perkins' probably best bet is sticking on as the 4th tight end. But I think he has a better than average chance, especially if he has – particularly I think that Jaguars game is going to be a real big one for him if he can sort of be a difference maker in the passing game, catching passes from Renfrey and Sims. Then I feel like Perkins has a better than average shot of sticking. So I think all 3 of those guys, it would be a decent possibility that all 3 of those guys stick. Okay, Jason at your boy J94, he asked, when will Atlanta take the division back again? It's been too long. Laugh out loud. Wild card this year?
I do think they could take it next year, as in 2017, not 2016. I think Carolina's still just that too far ahead at this moment. But I think they can, if they can continue to draft guys that actually fit with Dan Quinn's vision, if they can continue to get some impact players, and if guys can pan out and actually develop well, they could definitely take the division back again next year. Wild card this year, I don't think it's unrealistic. I'm projecting them to go 10-6 and be that wild card. I know Aaron's like, oh, they're a 7-9 team. We're normally pretty far apart on predictions every year, but Aaron has already said that he could see them potentially challenging for the wild card throughout the season. So it's not like it's not like either of us are too crazy.
Yeah, I did a simulator on sort of predictions and whatnot, and I think I had the Falcons finishing 8-8 in like the 8th seed. So they were like one win away from being the 6th seed. So it's not crazy for them because I think there's a clear drop off from who are going to be the top 5 NFC teams and who's the 6th best team. Now, I think Minnesota and whoever is 2nd place in the NFC West are probably going to be the 2 wildcard teams, and I don't see the Falcons. I don't think the Falcons are better than either of those teams. But it's possible if one of those teams slips, then there's a spot for the Falcons. I agree with Scott. I think if you're hoping for the Falcons taking back the division, it's probably not going to be 2016 unless the Carolina has one of the most epic sort of Super Bowl hangover seasons, which is possible, but I don't think it's likely. I think if you're hoping for Carolina to take a big step back, it's probably going to be 2017 because you're hoping, Cam Newton reverts back to being mediocre. You're hoping that their defense, really the thing is their defense. You're hoping that their secondary, all the changes they've had in their secondary this offseason don't work out and they don't get better. And their pass rush takes a big step back because Charles Johnson retires and Coney Ely isn't good and they don't re-sign Kawan Short. And so all of a sudden their defense going from what was one of the 2 or 3 best defenses in the league this past year is basically Thomas Davis and Luke Kuechly, and that's about it. And that's what you're hoping for. And if that's the case, then their defense is not going to be nearly as good as it has been, which is why they've been winning the division consistently the last 3 years, because they clearly have the best defense in the division. And if you're hoping that the Falcons take it, then you want to see continued growth for our defense moving forward. And hopefully, maybe if all those things happen, then maybe the Falcons defense will be better than Carolina's defense 2 years from now. But probably, I think if we're being honest, it's probably 2018 is probably the best chance for the Falcons, but it's possible 2017 could be it. Okay. Falcons Andy asks, if Alfred has another year like last year, do you pay $10 million a year to keep him?
we've discussed this multiple times. I'm always going to say yes because you got the cap flexibility to do so. You do it on a 4-year deal. But honestly, worst case scenario, you franchise him.
Yeah, we've discussed this ad nauseum this offseason. I think I wouldn't do it. I love me some Robert Alford. He's probably one of my 5 or 6 favorite players on this team. But when you're going to pay Desmond Trufant $15 million a year, and you don't need to pay a premium for a number 2 corner that's 29 years old, that's probably going to start to decline in 2 or 3 years, just because the way he plays isn't necessarily the same sort of style that you typically see in the corners that are able to stick around and play at a high level into their mid-30s. It just doesn't make a whole lot of sense to pay a premium for basically 2 more years of Robert Alford. So I wouldn't do it. But if I'm a team like the Saints, then I'd probably jump all over Robert Alford. He'd be a great addition to their secondary because they're garbage. But yeah,
they don't have the money next year really to go after him unless they want to continue fucking their cap up.
Yeah, they've been doing it for 7 years, so why not make it 8? Okay. Your boy Jay asked, who has played their way onto the roster so far? Is Brian Poole legit?
I would say the guys that have played their way on the roster are Brian Poole. I would say J.D. McKissick is another guy. Aldrick Robinson. I would put Ben Garland on that list. I would throw Brandon Wilds on that list. If I was making the roster today, the 53-man, those are guys that would, right off the top of my head, instantly be on this roster. I think Akeem King has played his way on the roster as that depth guy. I thought against second teams and third teams, he's been doing well. Outside of that, outside of those bubble guys, I can't really think of anybody else. I'd like to see C.J. Goodwin show some more out there because maybe C.J. Goodwin's the guy who ends up being that nickelback. I liked what he did in the first game.
Yeah, I was looking back at my 53-man roster prediction at the beginning of training camp, and there haven't been a whole lot of changes that I would make to it. I think, probably maybe Brandon Wilds, if he winds up winning that third running back spot, you could say he's played his way into the roster. I think Poole has done so, but I don't necessarily – I remember we talked about Brian Poole being really good back in May and June when we found out that we signed him as an undrafted free agent, so him making the team isn't a huge shock. Who else? Garland, yeah, but again, I remember we talked about him before training camp saying that he had a pretty decent shot among any of those guys not named Wes Schweitzer and Mike Person to stick on the team. Tia LaVea, but again, I think that's another example of a player that I think a lot of people recognize had a better than average shot of taking Toilola's job. I don't see McKissick. I don't think McKissick has sort of played his way onto this roster spot quite yet. I think he's probably poised for the practice squad. I still think the same 6 receivers going into camp are going to be the same 6 that come out of camp so far. I think it's going to be Julio, Sanu, Hardy, Robinson, Nick Williams, and Devin Fuller. I haven't seen anything so far this preseason to make me think that that's not the way the Falcons coaching staff are leaning. Even though I personally probably wouldn't keep Nick Williams, just because I think he's kind of limited offensively. He's been working pretty consistently with the first and second team offense. And, if he was really being challenged for a roster spot, you wouldn't probably see that. So, yeah. So, I think there's less surprises with guys making the roster this summer than there were last year. Okay, Joe Larson. He asks, what kind of production can we expect from Wilds this season, considering Coleman's lack of production in the preseason?
I'd love to see Wilds. I'm assuming Wilds makes the roster. I'd love to see Wilds get 50 to 60 carries this year. Assuming he does get those 50 carries and you average 4.2, you're thinking maybe 200 yards.
I mean, yeah, I'm not expecting much from whoever wins that third running back spot, whether it's Brandon Wilds or somebody else. I mean, if you go back and you look at the 8 games where Devontae Freeman and Tevin Coleman were both healthy and Freeman started those games and finished them, Coleman only averaged about 3 touches in those 8 games. So, I mean, you know, if whoever in the situation where the number 3 running back is all of a sudden the number 2 running back because either Freeman or Coleman are hurt, they're not going to see very many offensive touches. Like, I think Teron Ward had 115 snaps last year, and outside the 5 games where either Coleman or Freeman were hurt, I think, you know, he averaged maybe like 8 snaps a game or 5 snaps a game offensively. So there's not going to be a whole lot of opportunity. And most of those snaps for Teron Ward were in pass protection, which I don't think the Falcons are going to put Brandon Wilds out there in pass protection this year. So, I mean, I think your best case scenario is, as Scott said, probably like 50 carries over the course of the entire season. And that's probably only because the Falcons had a couple of blowouts and they threw him in there late in the game to sort of just play. So I'm not expecting a whole lot from him or whoever is our number 3 running back. It's sort of an afterthought position in the offense. If we're getting to a situation where that guy's playing serious reps on offense, we're probably in trouble offensively. So, yeah. All right, we got a couple more questions from our boy, Big Boy Brewski. He asks, any players you could see being cut? I'm assuming he's asking for any major players, surprise cuts or something like that.
Surprise cuts. Oof.
Because obviously any players, there's going to be 47 guys that get cut. So,
yeah. I mean, Eric Weems would be a name I'm going to throw out there. I'll throw out there Bryce Harris, Levine Lolo, who's kind of going down the roster right now. Let's see. These guys are all safe. Tyson Jackson. Courtney Upshaw. Tyler Starr. I know he'd be a surprise to you, Aaron. Outside of that, maybe Kamal Ishmael. That'd be it.
Yeah, the only name I'd probably add to that list is Philip Wheeler. But yeah, I don't think the Falcons are gonna throw. I guess if they decide to start Wes Schweitzer at right guard, then I think Chris Chester immediately becomes expendable. So, yeah, I don't think we're gonna see what we saw last year, where a couple of guys that were a little surprising get cut. Next question from Big Boy Brewski asks, what can we expect from Collins in these last 2 games before the suspension? More playing time?
I hope so. I mean, I think that they'll have a lot more playing time than what they've been having. I mean, I wouldn't expect anything but more playing time at this point, though.
Yeah, I mean, he worked with the second team last week after working with the third string against the Browns. So, it's very clear that they're trying to get him a little bit more involved. I would like to see him get a lot of more reps in the first team against Miami, because I think going up against Kenny Stills or Devontae Parker would be a good test for him. I don't think we necessarily need to see Trufant or Alford get serious reps in this game to sort of know what they are. What can we expect from Collins? I think we're going to expect what we've sort of seen, which is some solid play, some inconsistent play. And, I think that's going to be his MO for the foreseeable future. So we'll find out. Okay, our next question from Big Boy Brewski asks, thoughts on Brooks Reed's progress so far?
I mean, I think he's been looking pretty good out there. I don't think he's been an issue, if you will, against the running game. I thought he's looked at least as good as Bierman has in the running game. And he looks solid as a pass rusher the last 2 games. Obviously, we haven't really played anybody, but he's been creating some sort of pressure off the edge.
Yeah, I think Reed has been fine. I think he's been basically what he was last year. A competent role player. The big issue with him last year, I think, was durability and availability. When he was on the field, I didn't have major issues with anything Brooks Reed was putting on tape last year. I know some other people did, but I didn't see anything majorly wrong with it. And I think so far as a defensive end, that's been sort of the story of him this summer. I think he's done his job. He hasn't really wowed me on anything. He hasn't really made me shake my head at anything. He's just, he's a body. That's basically what he's being asked to do, and I think he's more than capable of being that guy. So, okay, I think this is our last question because I think we answered the last second question that Charles sent in about surprise cuts. Big Boy Brewski asks the chicken question from last week. Do you like drums or flats, and why?
Oh, man. I'm an all flats kind of guy because you get the extra crispiness. I feel like there's just more crispy skin on the outside of it. You get that little, bit of meat in the middle, and then you get the bones and you can pop apart. And I mean, it's just all sorts of fun right there. They're just fun to eat when they're flats. The little drums, they're just not fun. They're like, oh, hey, cool, we got this little drumstick. If I wanted to eat drumsticks, I wouldn't order wings. So I get all flats.
Okay. I don't blame you, Scott. Actually, I don't actually have a preference with drums or flats. Sometimes I'm in the mood for drums, sometimes in the mood for flats. It really doesn't make a difference. They're all delicious to me. Yeah, I have hot takes on a lot of things chicken wing related, but on this one, I don't have one for you guys. I'm sorry. I know you're ready for me to fire out some really strong opinions about drums or flats, but I don't have them. They're both good. I'm not going to complain about either one. Okay, guys. That is our show this week. We will be back to talk about the Dolphins game and to either tell you guys whether you should panic or not panic, hopefully not panic. We'll be back next Tuesday. If you want to get your mailbag question answered between now and then or on the show, and you can ask it between now and then, you can use the hashtag Falcons mailbag. That makes it easier for us to find it. You can tweet at the show's Twitter handle at FalconsPFC. My Twitter handle is FalcFans. Scott is Karasik S. Please check us out on Pro Football Central. You can find all of our archived shows on that website. You can subscribe to us on iTunes. I think we're also on Stitcher. Please rate us and review us on iTunes. That helps people find the show. Retweet us, like us on YouTube, subscribe on YouTube, all that sorts of stuff. And we'll be back next week to talk about how Brian Poole owned Jarvis Landry and more stuff from the Dolphins game.
We might even talk about how Wes Schweitzer owns Ndamukong Suh.
Maybe. You'll have to tune in next week to find out, guys.
Oh, and next week is the final cut day. And we'll go over all the not the final cuts, the first cut day, and we'll go over all those first cuts next week.
Yeah.